you just need people specialized in what they do, because they're going to think of things, they're going to look at it from a different angle, they're going to things that might be hidden, you'll never think of, they're going to bring to the table and bring it to light so that you can kind of deal with it beforehand.
All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm James. I'm one of the co-founders of Duet. I'm really excited to be with you all. If you're joining us live, you can drop your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll get to as many of them as we can, either during the discussion or at the end. So I want to introduce Rachel here. Rachel started her NEMT company back in 2008 with 2 vans after an honestly insane phone call she got about her grandfather's dialysis rides. 17 years later, once 2 van operation was moving more than 100 patients a day, like every weekday, on recurring contracts. And then in 2025, she sold it for 7 figures. So Rachel's been on a couple Duet podcasts before, if people have seen it. The reason I really wanted her to come back and talk about this is that she's learned a ton about how to sell an NEMT service during this kind of long, grinding sales process, as she'll tell you. And she's turned this into this clear to exit method, which is a 3-stage, 9-step system that she's built for selling your NEMT service and a business more generally for what it's actually worth. And also knowing who you are on the other side. It's not just about the money at the end of the day. So she's the author of the upcoming book, Both Sides of the Wire. And she now works a lot with owners who are doing 2 to 10 million in revenue and are looking to exit on their own terms. So I'm really excited to have you on, Rachel. Let's talk about how to sell an NEMT service for 8 figures. What you did right, what you would do differently if you were to do it all again. And again, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to join you today, and excited to kind of talk about this, because true to form, everything I do seems to be the hard way. I learned my lessons in real time the hard way. So I'm happy to share so other people hopefully don't have to go through the same things and experience
Yeah,
it.
yeah, that's always how it goes. So take us back to 2008. You got the phone call about your grandfather's dialysis rides and the week that followed.
So I lived in a very rural area at the time. I had just bought my home. I was 30 years old, 31 years old, and I had 2 young children. It was an 18-acre property, like my dream home. My grandfather lived about 60 miles away and was in renal failure. So he couldn't drive anymore at that point. So we were starting to look at options. How could we get him to dialysis? NEMT didn't exist in the same form that it is today. It wasn't called that. There weren't brokers. The landscape was just totally different. So I was calling around. I was new to it. And there was one provider in my county, because I was thinking I would move my grandpa in with me, and then, we would deal with the transportation and his declining health. And I was 18 miles out of the city, and they told me they wouldn't service me that far out, and they suggested I sell my home. That was the only option they could give me. And I thought it was like the worst answer I could possibly get. I'm already upset. My grandfather's dying, who was like a second father to me. I lived with them for a period during my childhood. I was extremely close to him. So it sort of enraged me, because if I'm experiencing this problem, how many other people were? And I had a corporate career that, I was happy at. I liked it. Um, and within 4 weeks, I had given notice at that job, bought 2 vans, and was trying to kind of muddle my way through and figure out what I needed to do. So it unfortunately didn't help my grandfather. He ended up passing away within 3 weeks after that diagnosis, but it kind of sparked um, my life's work and my mission. And I was angry. I was just so angry to hear
Mhm.
somebody you love, and the outcome is certain death. So I thought, what? And even if they didn't want to come out that far, they could have padded the phrase, or how they delivered that message. I just thought it was so insensitive for somebody dealing with vulnerable people to be so callous, and just it just didn't sit right with me. So that's kind of what started everything.
Yeah, and I remember you famously known for advocating, really caring about the patients and doing a good job and putting the customer first and everything. So, when you were actually going to sell your service, I remember you telling me 6 months before the private equity group approached you, you had like a broker valuing your business, and the number was so low, you said there was no point in selling. Is that right?
Well, yes. And I think most founders or owner operators have some type of idea. You know what your revenue is, you know, or you should know what your cash flow is, what your profit margins are. So you kind of get this number in your head, whether, mine might have been based partially in reality. I'm not really sure, but I assume this broker knew more than I did. So it was a great starting point. And I'm in Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin. And he had just recently sold another company with maybe like 3 or 4 months prior. It was, I want to say that the one he sold maybe had 8 or 9 vans, so half the size of my company roughly. But he was really confident that, they just went through this process, they know what to do. And it's lengthy. You have to give them all your reports and answer all these questions. Like it's an engagement with the broker. And he came back with the sales price and it was ridiculously low, and I sat there like, what the hell am I working so hard for if this is all like, I was dumbfounded, to be perfectly honest. So I told my husband, like, this is not viable. We're just going to have to work forever at this rate, because this is like the recurring revenue, which to me is just part of my daily life, how I handled my business, and you're transporting your patients. um, I didn't realize at the time that the recurring piece, I had an idea because it's like built in future work, but I didn't know how valuable that model actually was. I really truly had no idea. So I was a little deflated, and just went on about my life, put it out of my mind. And then that's when the private equity became an issue and an experience in and of itself.
Yeah, so you walk me through this. Like you get on the Zoom call, right? And it's just you, and there's like, three people and a lawyer on the other side on the private
Yeah.
equity.
So I had one gentleman was kind of my point of contact. So it's like you get to know somebody after a few calls, and we're kind of going back and forth. And it's like, okay, well, I've got some partners. Let's get on a Zoom call. And I was like, okay, great. And this is a couple years ago. I had never actually even been on a Zoom call at that point. I was very deep in my operations. And so it's like, let's navigate that. And as you know, James, I'm a little uncomfortable sometimes on the camera. It's not my favorite thing. But so I sat down, and they have three businessmen and a lawyer, and there's me, and I'm opening my books. I felt so out of my element. I actually felt really stupid sitting there. And I just wanted it to end at that point, because I was so naive. I didn't know any better, and I didn't have anything to hide, but I didn't realize the leverage I did have, I was giving away. And as the seller, I had a lot more leverage than I knew. And I don't think I fully even understood it until after the sale, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and they're asking you all kinds of questions about your books that you probably had never thought through because you needed to keep the business running, not like justify the valuation to some third party.
Well, even like one of the biggest mistakes, I used to be a buyer in my corporate career. So a big portion of that job is general ledger and coding your inventory and purchases to the right, accounts. With my own business, I had a CPA who kind of did my books for me and my quarterly report. So anytime I bought new vehicles or did anything, she would assign the GL codes. And I don't, I never even questioned like what should be an asset, what's, just an expense, where things were falling on my balance sheet. Like I really never even thought to question it. I had my reports done. I paid my taxes. I didn't think about it again. You go at the end of the year, are looking for the deduction. So that's one thing I wish I had known better, because in that private equity meeting, they were kind of questioning and zeroing in on certain things. And I really had no answer for it because I didn't take the time to pay attention to that.
Right. And you've said like the recurring revenue, the contracted revenue is the biggest valuation lever you have as like an NEMT owner. You built yours through like the adult daycare program, doing all the transport, some of the mix of sort of fixed route and on demand. Um, for people who are running on demand trips, maybe almost 100% today, where do they start? Is it worth getting into sort of, more of these contracts, more of this fixed revenue as they're thinking about selling in a couple of years?
I think it's good for any operator. I would highly encourage people to focus on that. For us, we operated like a school bus. So we had and I want to say it was 9 or 10 routes every day. You know, you're loading, and we had E350 vans that we use for our routes. So we're getting 10 people per vehicle, and you're able to bill for mile one for everybody. And they're all going to the same place, and the same people are going home in the afternoon. So, you know, 50 to 60%, maybe even a little more of my business was recurring, where we weren't seeking those rides. It's built in, you know. And I had some clients that are still with the company today. I guess that would be almost 19 years. So when the participants are aging out of high school, then they transition to the day program, and then they go there as, you know, they are able to go there as long as they want to and are able to. Um, so if you're thinking somebody in their 20s, you know, you might be transporting them for 30, 40 years if you're actually in business that long. And most of my clients, it was really long standing, the recurring ones. I mean, I had a lot, like 10 years or longer. Once you're, you know, you get those patients or clients and you're providing a great service, they really don't have an incentive to not use you. So I just always wanted to make sure we were delivering, and there'd be no reason to ever seek another provider. And every time more referrals came, I just always took them without exception. And you know, it's a little deceiving because you're thinking like, oh, if I could do a 60-mile trip and I'm going to get $300 or $400 for that versus your $50, you know, across town 4-mile trip. But when you're doing it 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year, that smaller trip just compounds and adds up so much more. So I encourage everybody to really try to seek those avenues out, you know, and try to build that for yourself as well.
Yeah, completely agree. And then let's talk about founder dependency. That's a big word as you're thinking about how to build a business that is valued highly when you sell. So you were, walk us through it. You were running the routes in your head. You were taking care of everything was sort of flowing to you, and you were controlling the business. Because again, it was hard to find anything that could do it with the precision you were looking for. Um, you were still doing everything manually and still very hands-on when you went to sell. In the book, you talk about how that you felt it almost made it unsellable. How does like a buyer price a founder who's like super super critical to the operation, and like what did that end up costing you?
So I can't put an exact dollar number on it, but I can tell you a story that I think will put it in perspective. But the founder dependency is a trap. And I fell into it because as my business evolved, everything was easier for me to just keep doing it because it came so natural, and we incrementally got larger. It wasn't overwhelming like a new person coming in trying to understand it. So I was probably the biggest asset and also the biggest liability in the business because I just kept doing it myself, and I would justify like it's just faster, it's quicker, and then I'd be a little irritated and resentful that I have to do everything, but it wasn't like empowering my people. But so founder dependency is bad. It's really bad, and you're never going to probably find somebody as good as you're going to do it, but that's okay. If you can get somebody 80 to 85% as good as what you're doing it, you're going to be okay. And I think most owners have a very high caliber, and they just set the bar really high and have high expectations. So it's really tough, you know, to find an employee that's going to come in and fill that same position. But for me, it was a little bit of a deterrent because, and I was very open and honest with the person purchasing the company that I'm hands on, I'm here every day, you know, and I was willing to stay on and train them and help. He has already sold the business because it was much more than what he expected. So he retained it for about 15 months, I believe. And it was so much more overwhelming than he anticipated. So he bought it thinking like, this is easy. It's transportation. That's what everybody thinks. And anybody that's in it obviously knows it's so much more nuanced than that. But, you know, so he came in fully aware that the founder dependency was a real problem, but he was up for the task and the challenge. And then when he got in there, it's just overwhelming. It really is. So I realized it was a disservice for myself, my company, the person who purchased the company. It's a trap, I guess. And some of that falls, I think, with ego. And I don't consider myself to have a big ego, but I felt like I was better than other people at that task. And I just kept doing it rather than taking the time to teach somebody.
Mm. Yeah, Howard's chiming in here. You need to drive the business, not drive the vehicles, which, couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. Even like, if you get away from driving the vehicles and you think, oh, now I'm working on the business, not in the business, but you're still like, you're still doing the scheduling, you're still doing this and that. If you were to like rewind time and be like, okay, I'm going to sell my business and I'm still the owner, I'm going to sell this in a year. I want to get myself out of this founder dependency trap. What would you look to do? Would it be about hiring the right people? Would it be about putting in place systems? What do you
Uh,
think?
Both. And I had an office assistant who helped with billing and things like that, but she wasn't able to do this. Everybody was overwhelmed by the schedule. And I think because I did it manually, so people looked at that and like it just was shocking. And to me, it just made sense. But you have to remember, a lot of my clients were recurring. So the schedules were kind of the same day to day. So it wasn't always like looking at 150 rides and, trying to play chess with it. But so I think I would get a manager, a general manager, and somebody. And I personally, I've thought about this a lot. I would do equity with whoever I would have run it, because then they have the incentive to really perform. So I think that would be a big thing. And then the routing software would be another. If I had that in place, it would have made it simplified for the new owners as well as the billing side, which again, I grew with the company, so I didn't find the billing to be that difficult, but it can be. Medical billing is a little tough. And so I think it really would have simplified that as well. And I didn't work with brokers the last 5 years of my business. So I guess had we had a broker contract, that might have pushed the software sooner. But because we weren't working with them, there was nobody telling me like, hey, you need to get on board and, move forward, get current with the times. And so had I had the broker relationship the last 5 years, I think that would have put the software in place too, so we could have worked the bugs out. And I also would have expanded more. I was kind of burnt out and I didn't want to grow anymore. So that was another factor in selling. The community needed more and I didn't want to be the person to do it. So I could have probably expanded quite a bit if I had given myself 18 to 24 months. But I just, I needed to be out. My dad was dying and there were just other circumstances at that point, but there's a lot of things I would do differently.
Yeah, I hear you. And that's a very, very common trap I see people work themselves into. Like I've met people who they are genius. They can hold the whole map of the city in their head and they're doing 10 vehicles like on demand, just sort of, oh, I know where which one should go. And it blows my mind. And like these people, they could get by without dispatching software. But then at a certain point, like maybe you can do 10. You were doing 17 vehicles. Like that's
Mhm.
incredible, even with the fixed route stuff. At a certain point, it's like, that becomes kind of exhausting. It becomes a big part of what you do. Like, how do you get to 30 vehicles? Are you going to hold 30 vehicles in your head? Like at a certain point, no matter how good you are at transport, like you kind of get stuck, or you're spending, I know a 35 vehicle fleet that was spending, 6 hours a day manually scheduling. And like, okay, they got on Duet, or you could do the same with any good dispatching software. And now it's like, half an hour of scheduling or less.
Yeah, the software is such a tool that I hope more people use. I was kind of at that tipping point because I couldn't take a vacation, which leads back to the founder dependency. So even if and I could take long weekends, but I was still, my employees were checking in with me. I was still maintaining the schedule, giving them the schedule for the next day to put out for the drivers. So like I said, I was the biggest liability. I know that, and I hate to say it, but it is true.
Are there any other systems, so okay, you put in place a dispatching software, make sure you have a good general manager who has some equity, as you've said. What is like the next most important process to put in place before you look to sell?
Um, I think you need to have your SOPs in place, standard operating procedures, job descriptions, review process, which is something early on I didn't have. I would give raises to my drivers, but I wasn't really reviewing them the way that I should have. And coming from a corporate background, anybody that's been in corporate, everything is documented and very rigid in how they deliver it. So I think it's important to have your job descriptions, just the protocol. If you anything happens, you have an accident, a headlight's burnt out, you don't have a tie down, and like, how are you handling these things so you don't have, as the owner, 8 drivers coming in the morning, hey, I don't have a tie down, I don't have this, and you're trying to do your job and it's just chaos. Where if you could have these things documented, it empowers your people to be able to function as an adult and like have their autonomy and make choices and not feel, like children having to go ask their mom.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple comments here. Let's get to before we move on. Howard's mentioning 50 vehicles, 135 employees, 1,200 trips a day, 6 dispatchers, and no software. Like,
That's
geez,
incredible.
yeah,
Wow.
that blows my mind. And
Yeah.
then Gene has a really good question here. Was it difficult to scale up from 2 vehicles to the final number of vehicles, which is 17? Is your decision to acquire additional vehicles, does that match up what you expected in terms of revenue, or did you buy vehicles and then try to get more business?
um it was hard, it was very hard. So I probably had 4 or 5 vehicles, and we were renting a space, and I couldn't fit any more vehicles inside what I was renting. So we either had to start looking for something new. I ended up purchasing some land and building a building, and then I had to scale at that point because I bit off way more than I could chew comfortably. And I had panic about it after the fact, but it was too late. So we went from 4 or 5 vans probably to 12 or 13 in about 18 months to 2 years, I would
Wow.
say. It was hard. It was so hard, but it was just necessary because every time I would buy a van and hire a driver or two, it's like more work was coming in and more referrals were coming in. When I built my shop, that was in 2016. So we kind of found a rhythm. We're going, and then COVID happened. And thankfully, I have purchased every single vehicle I've ever had outright. I have never financed a vehicle, which really saved me during COVID. I didn't have all those payments to worry about. I would have went under, I think, had I had all those payments to worry about. So we bought our vans a lot of times from auction, and we always had 2 or 3 extras. So the growth wasn't difficult because we always had those spare vehicles anyways for breakdowns and other things that might come up. So my husband, who managed the fleet, always just wanted backups. Like, that's just how we operate. Because the worst thing I want to say to somebody is, "Oh, I can't get you to dialysis," or, "Oh, you had surgery today, but we have a flat tire. I'm sorry." So we always had extra drivers. We had a person that did our cleaning, but she was also a credentialed driver. So if somebody called out sick, it's like you have a built-in person my husband would drive to if needed. It didn't happen very often, but thankfully I was off the road at least the last 12 years probably. But um, so yeah, the growth was organic. It was very stressful, but it was somewhat organic at the same time.
Makes sense. So, going back to the our scheduled presentation, let's talk about like the title question. Like, you sold for 7 figures, knowing everything you know now. If you were starting that run up again and you wanted to sell for 10 million or more, get that 8 figure mark, what would you do differently in like the 2 or 3 years before the sale, before you even talk to a buyer?
I would get my management dialed in first off. I would probably add several more vehicles to my fleet, and I would have started expanding to surrounding counties. I would have really put a push in scaling in the last bit, because when you're going through the process, they want to look at your last 3 to 5 years. So you have to have demonstrated revenue. You can't just have like a 6 month window where you really did good. That's not enough to drive your multiple up. But so I think I would have probably had the management in place. I never had to advertise either. So I've never done a paid advertisement for my company. The growth was all organic. So I really would have probably started with, Facebook ads or other ways to start advertising and expanding into the surrounding areas to really. I probably could have added 6 to 8 vehicles, I think, comfortably if I really wanted to, but I just mentally didn't have the bandwidth at the time to take that on.
It's interesting you bring up like sort of pushing in that last like year or two before you sell. Is that because you want to get like the revenue number there's a couple different things that could be, right? Is it a question of getting the revenue number up and then sitting there to show it's consistent? Is it a question of showing like a high growth rate so they think, oh, I'll buy this and it will keep growing? Or is it a question like, what is the final, what does the last 3 months of revenue look like when you go to sell? And so you just have to push that up.
I think they're equally as important. They're looking at like more the projected future. Like, so I did a stock sale, and a lot of the purchase price was for goodwill, um, which is an intangible thing. But they're purchasing the recurring revenue contracts, and there's no guarantee that those contracts were still coming. But I think it's equally as important to have a demonstrated history at that whatever level. You need to be consistent, because if it's dipping up and down, they're going to take the average of your lowest. No buyer is going to say, hey, let me pay you for something, but sales might dip 20 or 30% periodically.
Right. So I mentioned the clear to exit method that you've developed earlier. Walk us through like the shape of that. Like there's 3 stages, 9 steps.
So the first stage is the honest look. It's intended to give you a valuation range of where your business is and what some of the gaps are and some of your issues that you can maybe work on and optimize prior to going to sale. For me, founder dependency was by far the biggest thing that I would have worked on. But that's stage one, is kind of identifying where you're lacking a little bit, what needs work. Then the second stage is optimizing your business and closing all of those gaps. So during the due diligence, nothing's going to surprise you. Nobody's going to say, hey, question this, and you don't have an answer. You will have already dealt with it or explained it if you need to, if it's not something that's just corrected on the balance sheet. But the third step, in my opinion, is much more important. It's what I really struggled with, was what comes after the sale. What are you going to do? And the identity loss. My broker did bring it up to me kind of in passing, and it's like, I'm going to have all this money, I'm going to travel. What do you like? What kind of question is that? And then when it happened, I didn't have structure in my life, and I've never lived without structure. So it was really an unsettling situation for me.
I bet. Yeah. I know you like your numbers. So at what point do you think it makes sense to start thinking about all this and what an exit looks like? Like if someone's, at 2 vehicles doing a couple $100,000 in revenue, should they already be thinking about this, or can it wait until, the last year or two?
I would argue you should think about it when you're starting your business. So everything you're building, it's going to be a lot easier early on when you're a smaller company to get your foundation strong. So if you have one vehicle and you're an owner operator, you should still have policies and procedures, I believe, documented. So as you start onboarding more staff members, it's already in place. There's nothing to worry about. And it's not a good idea, I guess, to answer your question. I don't think it's a good idea to try to do as much as you can in 12 months before the sale, because it's going to be stressful. It's going to distract you from your operations. So I think it's a much better way to sort of be built in just how you operate your company, and you're just always documenting things. And with the growth mindset, most people are in business with the assumption they're going to scale and grow. And it just simplifies everything if your documentation is in place. So I think people should start from day one thinking about it. I know some people don't, because you're so worried about getting trips, paying your bills. It's just not a thought with the selling. And I had thought early on my children might be interested. When I started the business, they were 7 or 8, somewhere around there. And they sort of laughed at me when I mentioned it when they were in college. It was just, they had no interest, none whatsoever. And I was really like a little sad about that. Like I've worked so hard and built this
Yeah.
up. And yeah, it was humbling. They were like, no, mom, that does not sound fun.
Yeah. And Gene has a great question here. The third part of like, what does your identity and look like? What do you do after the sale? Did you come up with that before the sale, or was that something you realized afterward?
I realized after, when I was sitting in my office trying to figure out a schedule for myself. Like I knew I was going to do consulting. My dad was dying, so I was kind of dealing with the death of my dad and some personal issues. My father-in-law had passed away 6 to 8 months earlier than my dad. So our family was just kind of dealing with a lot of different things. So I really didn't, I just assumed it would sort itself out. You get the bank transfer. I'm not going to have the stress of the day that, the 20 employees and having to be there 10 hours a day or whatever it is. And um, nothing could be further from the truth, especially for me. I'm a very type A person. My productivity has been tied to my output. I've never had idle time. I didn't expect myself to react as badly as I did to that. I thought I was going to cook organic meals and I'm going to, have a garden and can vegetables, and I don't like gardening. So why the hell would I think that's what I'm going to do? But that's what I had convinced myself was what was going to happen, and it was wrong.
That's so funny. I really can't imagine you sitting there canning vegetables, Rachel. Even I could have told you that.
I know. But it's like all these things. That's who I want to be. Like I aspire to be like Martha Stewart and creative and crafty, and I'm just not. But I thought, oh, I'll have all this time. I guess I told myself it's because I work too much, but I guess not.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like, I feel you. So let's talk about like the practical mechanics of the sale itself a little bit. So you did a sale. So like the contracts were all intact, like everything was passed along. But a lot of smaller deals are more like asset sales. They're like selling all the vehicles and everything. And you've also been adamant that like the exit team should be specialists, not like generalists, right? Like, people who understand your business model and how it works and are not trying to compare you to like an HVAC shop or something. Where do owners usually go wrong on the deal itself?
Um, well, like my accountant who handled my books, and he did it the whole time I was in business, but he was older and he actually is retired now. He's never been through a business exit. So he is not the right person to analyze that and give me feedback because he has no experience in it, even though he is a CPA. Um, and the broker, I didn't know I needed the broker, as naive as that sounds. I was dealing with the banker directly, and um, you just need people specialized in what they do because they're going to think of things. They're going to look at it from a different angle. They're going to things that might be hidden. You'll never think of. They're going to bring to the table and bring it to light so that you can kind of deal with it beforehand. So I think getting the right team in place is so very important. And NEMT is a little bit of a specialized industry. There's not that many NEMT companies that have sold. I mean, now there's maybe a few more, but it's a relatively newer industry. So there aren't just brokers across the country that have all done this. So, like the first one, he sold an NEMT and it had no clue on the recurring revenue. And he came back with a $200,000 increase in my purchase price. Like, what the hell is that? It,
Yeah, wow.
it was kind of insulting, actually. But again, it was just a whole world I didn't know enough to know that he was the one out of line.
Hmm. Yeah, so when people come to me and they say, James, I'm thinking about selling my service, who can mentor me, who can help? I say, go talk to Rachel. But as a general rule, like how do you recommend people find a mentor or a broker or someone to walk them through this sale that they've never done before?
So the broker that I used, and he was referred to me from a banker, but he does a valuation for you, a very in-depth valuation. You end up with a 30-page deliverable about your company, where it's weak, what um, you need to kind of work on as well, and he knows how to market it in a way to get the right buyers as well. So, I could list it on Biz Buy Sell, but then I wouldn't know what to do with people calling me talking. I just wouldn't be able to intelligently negotiate or even communicate with the people and the attorney. So I think a broker is great starting point. And the way my broker kind of worked with me, and he brokered the sale for the buyer who bought it from me and resold it. So he's gotten quite a crash course, I think, in NEMT in Wisconsin. But so your brokers and your lawyer, like I would not recommend anybody do anything without a lawyer. I've seen some clients of mine who are like, I have a broker looking at it, it's okay, and no lawyer. And it's just like, I wouldn't do that. People need to protect themselves. Like I went in with that private equity. I just assume everybody is as honest as I am, and that's not always the case. So I think you need to really just try to protect yourself and play devil's advocate, even though that might be against your nature. You really do need to protect yourself.
Yeah, and speaking of protecting yourself, Howard makes a point that I've also often mentioned to people. Like, if you are on the buying side, if you're buying an NEMT service, buying the stock sale is dangerous because if there's like a pending lawsuit and maybe you were hastily selling, somebody was hastily selling the business to get away from the pending lawsuit, like you as the new owner inherit that if you've done a stock sale. Whereas if you're just buying the vehicles, they can't come after you. Is there anything you would add? I mean, either from the seller's perspective of doing asset versus liability, or just anything else you wanted to
Um,
add to that?
I would. So we had to do a stock sale. It was the only way to keep our contracts in place because it's based on your federal ID number. So if a new buyer started a company and then wanted to take my contracts, they would have to reapply for all the contracts and their rates might not be the same. So then arguably the sale price could be different because they don't, and they might not get approved for that matter. You don't know. So we went with this, and for the buyer's perspective, yes, an asset sale is definitely better, but to keep the contracts intact, it was necessary to be a stock sale for us.
And there's no danger to the owner, like you when you went to sell the stock, right? Like, because it's not like there'd be a backwards lawsuit or something.
I guess if I misrepresented something and they could prove it, um, there probably could be. And we didn't have any guarantee of what the revenue targets would be. And I've seen some deals like that where you have to keep your revenue at a certain target, or the seller pays you money back. But we didn't have any of that in place. Um, and thankfully Tyler was able to grow the company, and of course I didn't have any lawsuits or anything negative, but it could be a problem, um, absolutely, if you don't really do your due diligence and
Hmm,
have the right people kind of checking into that for you.
got it. So, the buyer, wrote you a letter about like his family, his three kids. He's moving to the area. He wants to honor your legacy. You told me like you were really excited to hear that. That's sort of what you wanted. You talked about, maybe it would be nice if your kids could inherit it, or at least someone with that same spirit. What happened after closing?
um, he had no intention of moving to Wisconsin. It wasn't a true story, which uh, complicated things for him quite a bit. He had told me he wanted to kind of just see how things go for 6 months and then get a lay of the land and understand. But the changes started within 48 hours, and it was tough. Yeah, I think we should move on.
Fair enough. Is there anything you would say like what sort of vetting would you as an owner would you recommend owners do for sellers who are coming in looking to buy?
I would look into their character a little bit, and maybe even some people that have worked with them, get some references. I met with him several times, but of course, he's saying everything that you want to hear. And a business sale and purchase is very emotional. So I think emotions kind of take things over. And once he told me what I wanted to hear, I was like hook, line, and sinker. Like, this is the guy. This is a family coming in exactly the way I want my legacy. And it just wasn't truthful. So, and there's nothing after the fact. I mean, there's just nothing I could do, but it changed the dynamic from a local family run business to something different almost overnight. And I had no control over that. And it was a bitter pill to swallow.
Mm. Yeah, and it's like you've spent all this time building it up. You obviously want to be paid out, but you also want the business to keep running and take care of all the riders and all your drivers and employees. So I hear you on that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about like, okay, you completed the sale, first morning, nowhere to be, first time in 17 years maybe. Uh, what did nobody like warn you about that? What did you learn from that experience?
Um, Again, the loss of structure, and that my self worth, I guess I subconsciously tied that to productivity. So my cash producing, like income or cash flow producing asset is gone. So I think um, not having that money coming in the same way, not having somewhere to go. I had a lot of responsibility and I enjoyed it a lot. So now I'm sitting alone. My husband, he's a radio DJ, so he's still at his morning shows. He goes to work, and it's just like I have never, unless I was sick or my kids were sick, like I've just never on a Monday or Tuesday, just you're sitting home looking around like, what the hell? And um, and I've been working really hard since I sold the company, but it wasn't tangible things. I'm building, I'm building, I'm building. There's no metric like, oh yeah, that is going to pay off in 6 months, or, you're just blindly trying to find routine that doesn't exist. And I wish I would have thought about it more, what my actual day-to-day life would have looked like, because I probably would have started my consulting 6 to 8 months earlier for sure. Just a couple different ventures that I'm working on now. I think I would have started it earlier so that I would have been launching a little sooner than how things are going like today. Not that it's bad, but for me as a person, I have lists. I'm just a very highly organized person, and not having that structure was really, really hard for me.
And I think, one of the reasons I think your book is so good is because a lot of guides or methods here kind of stop at like, hey, you sell, done, like go travel, go can vegetables, whatever. And so it's really great that you've included that. And I think there's also like a real, hard-nosed reason to think about that, right? It's like because it helps you negotiate from the right mindset. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I was burnt. I was facing burnout, like severe burnout. My dad was dying. My father-in-law just passed away, and I just wanted it over. So, we have the buyer in place, and it's like almost wouldn't have mattered at that point. I just wanted the sale over, and to kind of move on with like the unicorns and rainbows in my head of how this was all going to play out. And I just emotionally, it's just such an emotional experience. You wouldn't think so because you're dealing with analytics and numbers, and it just was very unsettling, completely.
So you've also said there's one question that tells an owner whether they're actually ready to exit right now. What's that question?
I don't know if there's any one question, to be perfectly honest. I want people to think about, like, for me, there's just several things, but can you leave your company and take a vacation? If not, you're going to be on a for sure path to burnout.
Mm.
You need to make sure you're taking that time to rest and cultivate your hobbies and have your interests, which hopefully a lot of people are better at that than I was. But one of the main questions is just, who are you if you're not the business? What do you stand for? Like, every day, my mission was to service my community and transport these people. And um, a lot of founders, I think it's important to have that, um, I guess, a mission. I don't know, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this has been fantastic, Rachel. I want to save some time for audience questions at the end as well. So, feel free to think about questions, put them in the chat here. And while we're doing that, what's the best place people should go if they want to book a call with you as they're thinking about selling, if they want to buy your book?
So if you want for the selling, it would be cleartoexit.com. And the book isn't for sale for purchase quite yet, but that's where you can order through there as well. If it's for the NEMT consulting, it's nemtgc.com. And email, I mean, either one is fine. You're going to get through to me in either case. And hopefully the book we're looking at launching in about 8 weeks, I would say. I know I keep kind of pushing the target just a little bit because I have
It'll
so many
happen.
other things happening. But um, so yeah, cleartoexit.com or nemtgc.com.
Yeah, and if you ever have trouble, like ping me, and I talk to Rachel pretty often, so I can pass anything along. Cool. So actually, a question from Innovators Tales. This is interesting. Product designer researching the NEMT space. What's the biggest pain point you think software could solve for operations?
Um, it solves a
I
lot of
also want to know the answer to this one.
Well, I think it solves a lot of problems. It depends with each, I guess, company, what is the issue that they're facing. Thinking of the person who purchased mine, he was from Iowa and didn't know this area. So the software for him I think was really important because it simplifies him having to go on Google Maps or pull out a map and try to like figure this out because he's not familiar with the area. So the routing optimization is a big piece. And the billing, if you have that portion integrated, I think billing can be a great help. I think Duet offers dispatching, which could also be a big asset. For 20 years of my life, I would have two phones everywhere I went. And it would have been so great if I could have just left the phone and, like, hey, let somebody else take that and, schedule it.
Yeah, exactly. you ideally you sort of you offload and you offload and offload and like you're and I know operators who have sort of just done been very very non-founder dependent even from early on. They sort of offload. I mean, our goal at Duet is to be able to take on anything you don't want to do as an owner and do it for you, do it in a very with a lot of deep NET experience behind it, but do it for you. And then like you as the owner can focus on whatever you want to do. I know owners who've been very successful giving us like that kind of boring, grindy stuff, and then they put their time into business development or something, which is something that is very difficult for like building that relationship between you and the facility manager or something is like something you as the owner have to do. Building the like keeping your employees really happy and motivated. That's something you as the owner have to do.
I agree.
Okay, here we go. Getting into some of my favorite topics. What's the next step with AI as it pertains to dispatching software?
I don't have a good answer for that. I have a software company that I co-founded, Direct Appointment, but I'm not exactly ready to share everything about that. James, you might have a better answer for this.
I could do a whole podcast on what's the next step with AI as it pertains to dispatching software. I mean, I'll tell you what we at Duet think, right? One, I think it is. I mean, long story short, it's like AI dispatching, like an AI doing available 24/7 who's doing the work of a human dispatcher. Um, People still want to talk to humans, and so I don't know that you want to plug in today's AI for everything just yet, but in 2 3 years it will be able to do everything, I think. um, I think right now you're looking at AI for inbound calls. Like it's much better for a caller to hit an AI that's friendly and programmed correctly and can speak on a variety of topics than to hit an answering machine. I think something like 85% of the time, if a new caller hits an answering machine, they're going to book with someone else instead. We have put a lot of thought into voice AI for outbound as well. Like we have AI that will do outbound reminder calls. Say, hey, Miss Martha, like you have an appointment at 2 p.m. tomorrow. Are you still good for that? And it can, flag in the software for the dispatchers if Miss Martha wants to, her appointment got rescheduled or canceled or something. And then I think like there's a piece that I never know whether to call it AI or algorithmic or what, but just sort of improving the like basically being able to say, oh, we have room on Tuesday, we could fit this trip in, or we don't have room. And the AI can get better and better there. Like we're thinking a lot about like how do we look at past patterns and like, oh, this facility, their pickups, they're never ready when they pick up. So we got to allocate a little more time. This facility, they're out there waiting for you. So turnaround time is less than 5 minutes. And so I think you can go deeper and deeper with AI into sort of AI that's learning from the schedule as you go along. That's where I see AI moving, if you ask me. Other questions? We've talked before. Actually, there's another great podcast Rachel and I did together about like pricing in NEMT. Could you speak a little bit to how NEMTs set the rates and what people get wrong, and then how getting it wrong can show up in the valuation later when you go to sell?
I think a lot of people, when they're coming into the space, they model their prices on the competitors, which you want to be in line with your competitors, but you also have to know what your expenses are. Um, as everybody knows, today the insurance rates are astronomical. Just when I sold, I was paying about 500 a month per vehicle, and I have clients getting quotes at 1,500, 1,800. Um, so a pricing model that I would have used for my company is not probably sufficient for somebody with that much overhead with just the insurance costs. So you really need to break down what your expenses are and then model your prices on that. But you do need to also stay in line with the competitors. I try to encourage people, you don't want to be the cheapest one out there, because it's going to be so hard to increase your rates where you need to be. And if your service is a good quality, most people will pay for that and they're reasonable about it. It Quality is one of those things I didn't skimp on ever. And if somebody didn't want to pay it, that's fine. They're just not the right customer for me. I'm not going to, bring my pricing down just to appease everybody, because a lot of times those could be the clients that are, the squeaky wheel and they're difficult. And it's just not something I did. We charged what we charged. It was a great service. You got a great service delivered, and I, expect to be compensated fairly for it. So I try, and it's really tough when you're starting to have that mindset, because you're like, your bills are due. You just need to get some rides. You're trying to build your clients, and it feels counterintuitive or counterproductive to say that, but it really is a disservice to the industry as a whole. If everybody keeps trying to undercut each other, it's just setting a horrible precedence. And this industry, our margins are razor thin already. And I feel like people need to really just focus on the quality aspect and what's good for your business, what makes you profitable and sustainable, so that you can, service more people and grow. If you're undercutting, you might go out of business in a year, 2 years, or whatever it is. So it's not going to serve you well anyways. And just being busy for the sake of being busy is awful. It's not fun.
Yeah. And I'll add, like being you're under a lot of pressure, as you said, when you start. You just need to fill the vehicle, you feel like. If you take underpriced trips from brokers, the broker's going to be like, great, this guy will take anything, and the broker's going to keep sending you those low rates. They will never offer to pay you more. You got to
Yeah.
be willing to say no to the broker.
Well, that's right. And they're going to give you your scorecard where you turn back how many trips, and then they're going to stop giving you trips because you're scoring so badly on, the metrics that they're tracking for you. So um, I encourage people not to get, if you can do it without the brokers, I highly recommend that, or use them more as a fill-in, not your main revenue source. But yeah, you're right. If you do it once, they're going to keep expecting it, and then that's going to get counted against you at some point if you
Yeah.
turn them back.
And I think, like, I've seen people be successful who went in and they did underprice, honestly, the level of service they were delivering for like the first month or two when they were going to facilities. And they would do a couple trips, prove they could do a really good job, and then they would raise their prices, and then 2 months after that, raise again, 3 months after that, raise again, until they quickly sort of catch up to where they should be relative to the level of service they're providing. I think you can get away with that sometimes, but you just cannot sit under the market. Like, again, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're shooting the whole market in the foot if you're, running yourself out of business in 9 months and just sort of delivering, like,
The
doing almost free rides for other people.
What I would question as a consumer, why are your rates, unless they're very upfront, like, hey, this is a severely discounted, I wouldn't want to work with a company that every 2 or 3 months is having an increase, because I just feel like that doesn't feel stable and safe to me. My thought would be, are they having cash flow problems? Because why else would you have to raise your rates so often? And that's just me. I mean, other people might be fine with that, but that would be my first thought.
Yeah, no, that's a fair counterpoint. So Gene had another good question. Obviously each company is different with cash flow, revenue, debt, but all things equal, what's a good rule of thumb for figuring out the valuation of a company? Like, is there an average multiple of revenue?
Typically, service-based industries are, you know, 1 to 6 times, like your SDE, if you're using seller discretionary earnings, which typically I think under, maybe 5 million, that's probably the way it's going to be figured out. But that's such a hard question to answer, because everything is so different, and really it comes down to what's a buyer going to pay for it. But I would probably, say you want to try to aim for 4 to 6 would be, and that's something like your CPA and accountant or attorney, everybody will kind of walk through with you, because every situation is just so different, and different markets are so different as well.
And can you walk us through seller discretionary earnings?
So that is taking like the EBITDA, so your earnings before interest, depreciation, taxes, and amortization, but you're adding the add backs in, which are expenses that you might be running personally through your company, whether that's your personal vehicle, your cell phones, maybe you have a cleaning, whatever it is. A lot of owner operated businesses run a lot of personal expenses through the business. So you want to identify what those are and add it back, because that's part of somebody buying it. That's more profit that they're going to see than what's being reflected on your tax return.
That's a great point. Is there a range in terms of like total revenue, like what sort of multiple you can get on that, or does it really it comes down to like the SDE?
It comes down to that. And your liabilities, I didn't have any debt, none, zero. So that helped when I was selling. So the person purchasing it wasn't buying potential lawsuits or just expenses that he didn't incur, because we did do the stock sale, which is a little unique, but I had my financials were so clean, and there just was nothing as far as a red flag for him.
Hmm. Well, I think we're coming up on time. Rachel, anything else you'd want to add as like a takeaway that people can apply from this call?
Um, if anything, it's get your systems and processes in place. It's so important. And I know when people are starting, there's a million and one other things that seem more important, especially if you don't have drivers working for you. But in the long run, you're just going to be so much better positioned. And if you ever have an accident or the insurance company wants, to see what your process is, you're covered, because it would be horrible. And I have a friend that they had an accident and had no documentation, and it was a nightmare with the insurance company, and she ended up getting dropped from them because she had no documentation, which was scary. And she only had two drivers. She's like, I just didn't think it was that important. And you have so many other pressing things all the time, but the foundation, as with anything, just take your time and get your foundation right. It will make everything that comes after easier.
Yeah, could not agree more. All right. Well, thanks everyone who came to this live broadcast. Rachel, thank you so much as always for coming on. I always learn something new when I'm chatting with you.
Thank you for
Um,
having me. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to talk to you and all things NEMT, right?
yeah, of course.
I mean, it is
And
interesting to me.
yeah, and for anyone watching, like cleartoexit.com, or if you Google NEMT growth consultants, you can find Rachel and her book on those places. All right. So thanks everyone, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.